really all I was coming to do was bring a message from his wife and from his lawyers, who he's never had a chance to meet. But the focus really needs to be on the Trump administration, because at the end of the day, Bukele and the government in El Salvador, if Trump got on the phone and said, okay, send him back, he'd be here in a matter of hours. So keeping the Trump administration in the spotlight and making sure we keep pressing them to comply with the Supreme Court order and the other judicial orders, not just in Kilmar's case, but in others, that's what we need to focus on.
All right, kind enough to join us again, friend of the show, Congressman Glenn Ivey out of Maryland's 4th District. Congressman, Mike and Nick, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast again.
Thanks for having me back.
You know, Congressman, we're going to get into a bunch. You and I were talking about this off air of your trip to El Salvador. I want to get into the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case trial. We don't even know if he's going to be having a trial, but I want to get into your travels to El Salvador and all of that. I want to get into so much legal stuff because obviously I know you're a former U.S. Assistant Attorney, but Nick and I were just talking about this in the first segment with respect to Harvard and the legal battles ongoing with respect to President Trump right now. And I know, obviously, I know you're a Princeton man, first and foremost, undergrad, but I obviously know that you went to Harvard Law. So very apropos for this question, the legal fights and the cloaking all of this in Harvard's response to anti-Semitism. My co-host made a great point in the previous segment about, well, then how come we don't have this ire for other groups and with respect to those other groups, right? Like, why are we cloaking it all in one bucket? And why are we aiming it all at one university? Why is this one university the beacon for everything of the Trump administration's ire? What do you make of all of this? Put your legal hat on for me. Put your member of Congress hat on for me. Put your Democratic member of Congress hat on for me. What do you make of Harvard and Trump I keep saying Trump University. Trump University is no longer. And the Trump administration's fight with Harvard University.
Yeah, the Trump University went the way of the dodo bird. I think to the questions you raised, I think part of what's going on there is the anti-Semitism issue. Although Harvard acknowledged it had some issues with, I think, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. They had done some kind of report. But hooking this all on that, I think, doesn't make sense because the remedies they're demanding aren't connected to that at all. So, for example, they cut off access to any foreign students. Okay, if you're a foreign student who engaged in some kind of anti-Semitic behavior or some kind of racial discriminatory behavior, and you lose your access to Harvard or you get kicked out of the, well, that's one thing. But if every foreign student that hasn't had anything to do with either one of them and just came here from, Pakistan or something, I don't see how that makes sense. And it doesn't. They're just trying to do things to hurt the university, cutting off all of their federal funding and grants and stuff. Same deal. So I think the goal here is to make Harvard, bend the knee, so to speak, and submit to the Trump administration like Columbia sadly did. And some of the big law firms did, and, sort of a variation of this. I'm proud of Harvard actually for standing up and fighting on this. And I think they're going to win these cases, and they have the wherewithal to do it. They have endowment. I think it's over $50 billion, so they can spend the money to do it. And there's been an influx of support from alumni and non-alumni who were thinking, yeah, fight that fight. Here's some money. So I think they're going to be able to put together a team that's going to win this. And rightly so. The Trump administration has gone way over the line as to what the government should be doing, trying to tell a university or a college what to teach. And I think we have to beat them back. The only time things kind of respond with the Trump administration is when they lose. And they're going to lose here. They're going to fight. They're going to be mad at the courts about it. And we can go into that more with Kilmar. But, you got to fight the bully. And you got to beat the bully, and Harvard's got the ability to do it. So I'm glad they're taking it up.
Well, let's stay on that because you just mentioned about the legal fights in the courts, and we've had not only immigration lawyers, some that are representing some of the folks that have been rounded up by ICE. We've had obviously immigration reporters over the last few months, with obviously the Trump administration coming in, new policy, CBP app gone, Alien Enemies Act invoked, some old 1790s plus statute. I want to ask you almost like a two-parter here. First, I want to be fully transparent here. I've seen some instances down here in Miami with the Venezuelans and Cubans that are going to lose TPS status. We've seen some stories as well in Tampa, Florida, of some folks that have been like, I just didn't think this would happen to me. And they say it in Spanish, and it sounds funny when I say it, Congressman, ay, Dios mío, yo no sabía. But there were signs at the RNC of mass deportation. There weren't any asterisks that said, oh, no, we're only going to do it for this one group versus this other group. And the reason I'm summarizing it like that is because for you as an attorney right now, when you see this, the Alien Enemies Act being invoked, and you see due process, I want to get into your trip to El Salvador and Kilmar's case, but just give me your legal analysis of all of this. Like, where does this all shake out with respect to what the Trump administration is doing and the courts right now and some of the legal battles that are ongoing?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because the Trump Supreme Court is kind of holding the line here, which I never would have bet on, 6 months ago. But, I think the Trump administration is doing so much in such an extreme way that the Supreme Court had to sort of draw a line and say, no, you can't do that. Because the due process piece, Kilmar got picked up and taken out of here, even though another judge had already said, well, I've got some questions about some of these things, but we're not going to send you back to El Salvador, and we're going to keep you away from MS-13. You can stay here. They picked him up, deported him in violation of all of that, and now they're complaining about they can't get him back, which of course is silly. But we'll come back to Kilmar in a minute. But the Venezuelans you mentioned, I think they sent 250 of them down to CICOT, the Gulag maximum security prison in El Salvador. And 50 of those, the Cato Institute did a study and found that, and the Cato Institute is no friend of the Democratic Party, by the way. They found that 50 of the people, at least, who were in that group of 250 and were deported from the United States, were here in the United States legally. Their paperwork was in order. They were here on appropriate visas or whatever it was they were supposed to be doing. Everything was okay. And they hadn't committed any crimes or any kind of offenses here in the United States. So deportation is totally illegal. Then they sent them to El Salvador. They hadn't committed any crimes or anything down there. And they're from Venezuela, but there's no crimes or anything they committed in Venezuela. So these guys haven't done anything wrong in any of these three countries. They're being held in a prison, and they're being held indefinitely in a prison that is maybe one of the most dangerous, scary places in the world, certainly in the Western Hemisphere. So, that's about as bad as it gets. And you had a judge who said, when they were sending them down there, you guys need to stop. If the planes are in the air, bring them back. They violated that order. And now they're still fighting about whether, now that they're there, they're sort of arguing, well, they're there now, so you don't have jurisdiction to bring them back, which of course is ridiculous. And then they're pretending that Trump can't do anything to bring them back, when we all know if he picked up a phone and called the president of El Salvador, Bukele, and said, hey, send those guys back, they'd be here in time for dinner. So, it's kind of pathetic that they're doing it this way. But the upside is the courts have been on the side of these people who've been deported without due process. I think the more the Trump administration does it, the more likely it is that the courts will stay in the position that they are, because now that they've and the Supreme Court said, hey, facilitate his return, it's hard to back away from that for them. And the due process piece is the right thing to do. Even if you bring them up, give them their court hearing, and then send them back somewhere else, that's, if a judge decides that's the way to go, I can live with that. But to send them without having any chance to appear before a judge, none of these folks have had a chance to communicate with a lawyer, which of course would be required here in the United States. And for most of these, like for Kilmar, they said it was a mistake. for the 50 that I just mentioned, Venezuelans, it's clearly a mistake, but they won't do anything to fix it. I mean, that's just about as un-American as you can get.
Representative, on that subject about due process, it seems a part of the disconnect for voters is the understanding that, and then correct me if I'm wrong here, but is citizenship a requirement for due process as someone in the United States? Because it seems like for Trump supporters, for Republicans leaning on that side of the argument, that that one's immigration status could potentially preclude them from having the benefit of habeas corpus, due process, and the like. Can you just demystify that and make it really crystal clear for us,
Sure.
for listeners and viewers, what the truth is behind all that?
Yeah, the Constitution says person, not citizen or constituent or whatever. So under the obvious plain language of the Constitution, it's any person. And, I also get attacked on things like he's not your constituent, but same deal. When they drew up my district, the way they count the 775,000 or whatever that number is by person, the word. And at the time they drafted it, women weren't citizens. They couldn't vote, but they were persons, so they counted. African-American slaves were 3/5 of a person, but that was corrected in the Civil War amendments that came through and gave us full citizenship. But we were still person at that time. So neither of those arguments work. And I think the fact that they always focus on those kinds of things and never address the Supreme Court saying, hey, they said facilitate his return. Him staying in El Salvador forever isn't facilitating his return. It obviously doesn't fly. And then the next court down, but above the trial courts, it's called the Fourth Circuit. The judge on there, J. Harvey Wilkinson, Reagan appointee, one of the most conservative judges in America, said, you can't, this is horrible. You got to bring him back so he can have his due process. So, he's a person. Every person in the United States gets due process, especially for deportation or something major like that. And he's a constituent, and he was in my district. Everybody who lives in my district is a constituent. And even if he hadn't been, he still shouldn't be locked up and throw away the key down in El Salvador. So, and I'm gonna get involved in cases like that. I'm gonna try and address that. So, they keep coming up with that kind of stuff, or he's a gang member, or he's this, or he's that, or the other. And for all of those kinds of things, I say, look, you're saying a lot in the press conference, in the White House. Why won't you just bring him back? Then you can come to a court, put your hand in the air and swear to tell the truth. And then you can make those statements subject to penalties of perjury. That's another story. But just running your mouth from, the press gallery or something, that's just chatter, as one of the judges said. Doesn't count, doesn't matter. Bring him back so he can have his day in court.
This episode of Can We Please Talk is presented by our friends over at Fresh Roasted Coffee. Delicious tasting coffee since 2009. They've been our proud sponsor. You see the promo code there. Look at this. They sent me this beautiful kit right here. Listen to that. Listen to that seal coming out, right? What's in it? Environmentally safe, compostable K-Pods. I love the dark Mexican blend. You can go to their website right now, take the quiz. That quiz is going to put you with a flavor profile. Listen to that sound of the coffee that you're going to be matched up with. Go to freshroastedcoffee.com. Click the link right now in our show notes. You can see it right there. Click that link. It's going to take you to the site. When you get to checkout, use our promo code, Can We Please Get 20? All one word, Can We Please Get 20, 20. You're going to get 20% off your first purchase. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com, our official sponsor of the Can We Please Talk podcast. Let's stay on that because you and I were talking about this off air, and you can go follow the congressman on social media. You posted a lot about your trip to El Salvador. You and I were talking about this off air. I'll bring it here, where you didn't get to accomplish. The ultimate goal was to obviously meet him. And, there's so much ire on that side that Democrats are defending this one person, like you said, that's not been proven to be a gang member, but prove it in court. And then obviously, if you want to send them back afterwards, we'll let the judge decide the merits of that. So tell us a little bit about this trip, obviously what you were trying to accomplish with respect to this trip, and then answer the broader question of why, again, this person is a beacon. Obviously, the senator in your state also went down there as well. This is all about due process because the Constitution says person. It doesn't say all of these other parameters and qualifiers that they want to put in there.
Yeah, I mean, part of why he became the face of this is ironically that the Trump administration decided to seek an emergency appeal about his case. And so it sort of elevated him to the front of the line, so to speak. So everybody's paying attention to it now. And then when the Supreme Court came back and said, facilitate his return, they got really embarrassed about it and tried to double down on it. And the bots or whoever they are sort of making these arguments about him, he's an evil person or whatever. They never addressed the Supreme Court piece. And then another thing they try and do too is they'll say, well, he's a gang member, he's MS-13. And there was a finding in another court about it. The irony about that is that's based on a report that a police officer wrote based on a statement that somebody made to that officer. Two things about that. The one guy that made the statement didn't know Kilmar, said actually he was a gang member in New York, but he's never been to New York. But the second big piece is the guy was talking to a cop, the cop that wrote the report, a few months later got fired from the police department for providing confidential police information to his prostitute girlfriend. Now, this is the star witness that these guys are relying on. They don't want to bring that into court because who do they call to sit in the witness chair before that judge to swear that, yeah, that information is accurate? It's not going to be that cop. And it's not going to be, the guy who said he was from New York and wasn't. They probably can't find that dude anyway. So, of course, they don't want to bring it back because they know they don't have the evidence to back up the stuff they've been saying. It's easier for them to just keep jawboning it from the sidelines and not have to deal with it in the day in court. And the last point, too, I'll make on this, I guess, is even if all of the stuff they're saying is true, let's say he is a member of MS-13, let's say he is this, that, or the other, you still have to bring him back so he has his day in court. I mean, and it can be proven in court. You can send him out, send him back to wherever. That's fine. We live by the results. We're not asking for, the judge to come out a particular way like the Trump administration, but we can live with that. By contrast, the Trump administration attacks this judge, any other judge that rules against him, not just in these cases, but any other thing. He calls them morons and stuff like that. You've got 7 House members here House Republicans who filed articles of impeachment against 7 judges who've ruled against him. But of course, impeachment's for like bribery, treason, high crime, and misdemeanors. It's not for I disagree with your ruling. And it got so bad that the Chief Justice Roberts had to come out and say, "Look, folks, that's not how we do this. If you disagree with their ruling, you file an appeal. You don't call to have them thrown out of office." So that's where they are. Those are the tactics they're using. But I think we have to keep fighting it. We got to oppose that because we're defending not just Kilmar, not just the 50 Venezuelans, but it's the rule of law across the board. It's the entire American judiciary, it's separation of powers and checks and balances. And it's what's standing between us and Trump getting totally out of control.
Representative, shifting gears to talking about laws and the legislature, and I can't believe I have to keep saying the title of this, but the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and yes, that is the official title. Apparently.
There it is.
Obviously, just passed 215 to 214. Obviously, it's a very closely contested vote, but more importantly, from the side of no in this case, we've heard a lot about the cuts to, and I always get Medicaid, Medicare mixed up. Feel free to correct me. Medicaid, it seems like, was what was going to be cut into. What were some of the other concerns that you all had? Because I think what we're hearing in the broader space is a lot of spin about the benefits to people, but none of us, Mike and I included, are not looking itemized through this bill, whereas you and other legislators are. So what are voters not we're not really paying as much attention to in terms of what is the cost of this to all of us as taxpayers and citizens should this bill move forward and be passed by the Senate and then signed by the president?
Yeah, great question. I mean, all of the things that they've tried to do would get locked into place with the bills they're trying to move through right now. So not just the $881 billion cuts to Medicaid, but cutting programs like cancer research, Alzheimer's, all the medical research, their clinical trials aimed at fighting those diseases. There's also all sorts of things like Meals on Wheels. There's, school lunches for kids who are, low income and can't afford to buy lunch. There's Title I funding for teachers in low income schools. So you'll have schools. I heard one district, for example, that might lose 5 elementary schools, depending on how these cuts go through, because they won't be able to pay those teachers because they won't have the federal funding to do it anymore. And the cuts to Medicaid are doctors, nurses, and I think really significantly hospitals. So there's a lot of hospitals in low-income areas, many of which are rural and in red states and red jurisdictions. Those hospitals are going to have to close down. Not all of them, but many of them. And I think people are starting to understand that might mean, well, instead of me having a hospital 5 miles from now, I might have to go 100 or 200 miles, when grandma has a heart attack to try and get her to the hospital. She's not going to make it, right? We're going to be in a medical desert overall in some of these areas that weren't before. So sadly, I'm only touching on a few of these, but they're all over the place. These cuts that they've made, locking in the cuts to government employees, which also locks in place cuts to government services that many people were expecting to have and receive. And they don't really know the losses that are going to come from that until it happens. You've got cuts to FEMA, you've got cuts to the Weather Service. So the natural disasters piece, as we're going right into hurricane season now, could really be even more dangerous than it already has been because they're in denial about, climate change. So, it's the potential for devastating impacts is really pretty significant. And I think it's hard for people to get their arms around all of it because there's so much. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is they're trying to make a lot of cuts that help low income and middle income people so that they can have a big tax cut that goes primarily to wealthy people. So they're taking money from the needy to subsidize the greedy. And then when you layer on top of that the tariffs piece, which I think is going to cause, it's essentially a tax on the American people. It's going to raise costs across the board. I think Trump might end up pushing us into a recession that hurts everybody too. So there's a real big chance that everybody's life is about to get a lot worse over the next few months if all of these things go through unchanged. Fortunately, the Senate's taking a look, and whatever they pass and send back, we'll have another round of votes here in the House. But I don't know if we'll be able to beat it back there or here. But the key is to make sure people understand, so when they get a chance to go back to the voting booth, they can hold the Republicans accountable for what they've done.
Well, speaking of the voter booth, Congressman, and before we let you go, Nick and I always love to ask this question, which is, and I saw you, I believe it was a couple months ago on CNN with Pamela Brown talking about town halls, right? Town halls for a while were in the news cycle, and everyone, when their mother was getting yelled at in a different town hall. So I'd be curious for you, because you just talked about and Nick, apologies for the impression, the one big, beautiful bill. A lot of people know it. But you talked about what is in this bill and how it will truly affect people. Now, potentially, you're going to have to go back on the road, right? And town halls, you're going to be hearing it from people, just like Republicans are hearing it from people. So give me a two-parter here. What are you hearing from constituents primarily with respect to what the administration is doing? And I know you're getting the ire of what are Democrats doing for 2026. So kind of give me the answers of what is it that you're relaying back to these folks about what the Democratic Party is doing, and what are you hearing about the way constituents are feeling about the Trump administration overall?
Well, I mean, they're angry and frustrated with what the Trump administration is doing. I think intellectually they realize that we don't have the votes to block him in the House or the Senate, and he controls the White House. So there's not much we can do from a legislative voting standpoint if everybody stays, party line voting. So the key points I think I try to make to them is to do something right now. We need to target swing districts where House Republicans either just barely won or they're in a district where Harris carried it or, Trump's underwater, whatever it is, districts that we should be able to pick up. We need to target those districts. And we've got groups like the DCCC that already are running ads in those districts, telling people this is what the Republicans are doing, so that when the time comes to vote down the road, if that Republican doesn't change what he or she's doing, they can get voted out, and we can take that seat back and hopefully get a majority in the House. A more immediate possible benefit would be if that person starts feeling the heat in his or her district and says, I can't vote with that again because I'm going to get turned out of office if I do. That's even better. If we can vote the stuff down now, it prevents people from having to suffer for the next year and a half under these new laws. Unfortunately, they've already taken a vote to make a lot of these cuts that we just talked about. So I don't know if they're going to reverse their position now, but we'll have to see. But I think we have to keep doing that. And the other part, I think, is we got to support the courts. I think sometimes people will say, I don't care what the courts are doing. We want you guys to do stuff, but courts are making a big difference. And in some of those cases, House Democrats are filing cases along with, we're filing briefs in support of those overall cases. You got state Democrats, Democratic Attorney General briefs that are going in who are also making a difference. And the courts are doing a good job for us, but they're under attack from the Republicans because the Republicans know if they can break through that log jam, they have a lot more running room. So when they start calling for the impeachment of judges, we got to oppose that. When they go over the line and start attacking judges personally or verbally or whatever, we've got to oppose that. We've got to speak out against it. We've got to explain to the American people that the system's working the way the framers set it up 250 years ago. And they need to hold the line on that because Trump's trying to, essentially break the rules and take over, rip up the Constitution and just do what he wants to do.
Congressman Glenn Ivey, Maryland's 4th District. It's always a pleasure having you on the program, my friend. Continued success to you. Please stay safe.
All right. Thanks so much, you guys. Keep up the good work.